There has been a common perception for many decades now that all masculinity is toxic. This perception has been spread throughout our society by the feminists using propaganda. The education system is largely controlled by feminist women, and most teachers are feminist women. The masculinity of boys is being suppressed in school, and they're being treated like defective girls. The feminists have decided they want men to be feminine, and they think they can redesign us to satisfy their personal desires. This is happening because of a belief that if men are masculine, we will oppress women. Feminism has adopted a lot of myths and misconceptions. The feminists believe that all men have ever done is oppress and mistreat women. They believe the cause of this is masculinity. When a man is strong and decisive and he sets boundaries and has preferences, the feminists view that as controlling. They've been taught to fear the oppression of men and to see it in everything men do. Whenever a man is speaking, the feminists are trying to find any potential hint of the desire to control women. This has made it very difficult for men and women to communicate effectively. The belief that all men have ever done is oppress women is absurd. The true story of humanity is one of men and women working together to overcome seemingly impossible odds. We should be celebrating our mutual accomplishments, but we can't do that when the mainstream narrative says there is no such thing. Men and women have been intentionally torn apart and turned against each other. This is a global proxy war that is being fueled by many different motivations, some intentional and nefarious, and others well-intentioned but misguided. Why has masculinity been labeled as toxic, and why do modern women believe that men are naturally oppressive? If the average man and the average woman engage in an arm wrestling competition, and the man defeats the woman every round, is he oppressing her? If the average woman and the average man engage in a long-distance swimming competition and the woman defeats the man every round, is she oppressing him? Much of the perceived oppression of women is not the fault of men, but rather the result of our fundamental biological reality. Biology is similar to character creation in a role-playing game. There is a finite number of points to be spent. So if points are spent in one trait, there will be less points to spend in other traits. Women are capable of conceiving, developing, and delivering new human beings, which is the most amazing thing any person can do. It is unreasonable to expect that women should possess this awesome trait and also possess every positive trait that men possess. It's like modern women are trying to employ cheat codes to max out all of their traits, but they're only doing so mentally because this cannot be accomplished in reality. There are plenty of feminists these days who seem to legitimately believe that women are just as physically strong as men and can do everything men can do. If that were true, then women would be superior to men overall. If women can do everything men can do, but men cannot do everything women can do, that would make women superior to men overall. This is why the feminists are suppressing the femininity of girls and forcing them to be masculine. They want women to be capable of doing everything men can do, and they believe that the limitations of women are merely socially constructed. They believe that if they raise girls to be masculine, then they will be just like men. I find this to be incredibly ironic because the feminists claim to be pro-woman, but their actions make it abundantly clear that they despise femininity and the fundamental nature of women. The feminists also suppress the masculinity of boys and try to force them to be as feminine as possible. I was told countless times growing up that I needed to get in touch with my feminine side. I don't have a feminine side, and searching for my non-existent feminine side damn near destroyed me. I was told that I always need to be nice to women. Nice guys finish last, and women walk all over nice guys and take advantage of them and thoroughly enjoy intentionally hurting and destroying them. I was told that masculine behavior is not nice, and in our society, in the modern day, masculinity has been all but completely outlawed. Heaven forbid a man externally express anger. The feminists tell us that we need to be more emotionally expressive, but what they really mean is that we need to have feminine emotions and express them in feminine ways. They say we need to use our words and talk about our feelings. Talking about feelings does absolutely nothing for me or most men. It's a pointless waste of time. Men don't need to talk about our feelings. We need to change things in our lives and the world around us to make ourselves feel better. We do not tell people how we feel. We show people how we feel. We prefer actions over words. Masculinity is not toxic. The feminist suppression of masculinity is toxic. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I pose no threat to anyone. If you find my masculinity intimidating, then go away from me and stop subjecting yourself to the intimidation that is born out of your imagination. I don't like it when women are highly emotional either, but I don't tell women that they're not allowed to express their feminine emotions in feminine ways. I accept that women feel and express their feelings in different ways. I may find their emotional expression incredibly annoying, but I don't have the right to tell them they're not allowed to express their emotions in those ways. Women, however, have been granted the right to tell men that we're not allowed to express our emotions in ways of which they disapprove. Toxicity is separate from masculinity and femininity. There is no such thing as toxic masculinity or femininity. The idea of toxic masculinity is an attempt to demonize men. Masculinity is a vital component of humanity, and without it we would not exist. Masculinity makes men protectors and providers and builders. The modern world and all of the luxuries we currently enjoy would not exist without the boldness and aggression and ambition of countless masculine men. It is not in anyone's best interest for men to be nice, but we can and should be kind. There's a difference between niceness and kindness. Nice guys are virtue signalers who want people to believe they're nice. Their niceness is disingenuous, however, and it is often hiding dark underlying traits and desires. Sometimes being kind is not nice. Sometimes people need to be told the truth, despite how uncomfortable it may make them. Sometimes people require a masculine father figure to set rules and boundaries and bring order to chaos. That's not nice, but it is kind. The feminists hate masculinity because they have decided that the natural traits and behaviors of masculine men are superior to the natural traits and behaviors of feminine women. They are resentful of the natural masculinity of men because they have chosen for themselves goals that are much easier to achieve with masculine traits and behaviors. If I chose for myself the ultimate goal of being feminine and being capable of doing everything women can do, I would be setting myself up for inevitable failure. If I decide that I could only attain meaning and fulfillment and joy by giving birth and becoming a compassionate and nurturing mother, then it would be impossible for me to attain those things. That would probably make me bitter and resentful of women for naturally possessing the femininity I would be choosing to desire. There is nothing wrong with men or masculinity, and we do not need to be redesigned. There is also nothing wrong with femininity or women, and they do not need to be redesigned either. It baffles me to hear leftists and feminists claiming that diversity is our greatest strength, and then becoming infuriated if anyone dares to acknowledge the diversity between men and women. Diversity can often be detrimental and cause a lot of problems, but the diversity between men and women might legitimately be our greatest strength. Yet, ironically, that is the one kind of diversity of which the leftists and feminists are absolutely intolerant. The greatest superpower of humanity is our ability to diversify and specialize. That is the reason why we have been able to not only survive and thrive, but almost completely dominate this entire planet. If every member of ancient tribes were as obsessed with independence as people are in the modern West, humanity would have died out before it even got started. If every member of a tribe insisted on being capable of doing every task for his or herself, everyone would have been Jacks and Jills of all trades and masters of none. It was much more beneficial for tribes to have members who diversified and specialized into different tasks. If you assign the role of dedicated toolmaker to the person who possesses the greatest natural affinity and proficiency for toolmaking, then that person is going to become an expert toolmaker. Any reasonably intelligent and physically capable person could make a primitive stone tool, but a dedicated expert who spends tens of thousands of hours doing nothing but that is going to learn all kinds of tricks of the trade and shortcuts that will drastically increase the quality of the final product and drastically reduce the overall production time for tools. That analogy holds true for the diversification and specialization into masculinity and femininity. If men and women are trying to be both, then we become Jacks and Jills of both, and masters of neither. Men are not naturally feminine, so the only way we can become feminine is by intellectually creating an artificial pseudo-femininity and imposing unnatural feminine traits and behaviors upon ourselves. Women are not naturally masculine, so the only way they can become masculine is by intellectually creating an artificial pseudo-masculinity and imposing unnatural masculine traits and behaviors upon themselves. This is what leads to nice guys who are just pretending to be nice, and boss babes who are just pretending to be boss babes. This creates weak men and psychopathic women. The prevailing perception in our society is that femininity leads to one being weak and incompetent. So when men try to be feminine, they intellectually create and employ that weak and incompetent version of femininity. That is not real femininity, however. Femininity does not make women weak or incompetent. On the contrary, feminine women can be impressively strong and competent. Similarly, when women try to be masculine, they intellectually create and employ a psychopathic and materialistic version of masculinity. That is not real masculinity, however. It is a false perception of what masculinity is. Masculinity does not make men psychopathic. It makes men protectors and providers. The primary reason why masculine men want to attain material wealth is so that they can use that wealth to benefit the people for whom we care. Real masculinity does not make men selfish, it makes us selfless, and even sometimes self-sacrificial. Men will sacrifice their lives to protect others without hesitation, and that is a very positive aspect of masculinity. It is ironic that modern feminist women are adopting many of the toxic behaviors that they mistakenly associate with masculinity. They endeavor to become the female version of the most toxic men. They suppress their femininity and develop a very toxic pseudo-masculinity that makes them incredibly psychopathic, materialistic, nihilistic, and hedonistic. They place the highest value on money and fame, and they desperately crave power. They do not desire the acquisition of power so they can use it to benefit people. They seek power so they can wield it selfishly to satisfy their own personal desires. They do not work to attain wealth so they can share it with their families and communities. Wealth is not a means to an end for them. Wealth is the end for them. They think that's the way men are, and what masculinity is, so that is what they endeavor to become. They accuse men of exhibiting toxic masculinity, whilst they develop a very toxic form of pseudo-masculinity within themselves. Real masculinity led ancient, primitive, tribal men to form a protective barrier around the women and children and elders in their tribes. Real masculinity caused those men to brave the elements and face down terrifying predatory animals to protect and provide for their families and communities. Real masculinity drove men to invent and create and construct all of the technology and infrastructure and buildings in the modern world. Real masculinity motivated the great philosophers to wrestle with all of the challenging concepts that needed to be understood in order to develop modern civilization. Real masculinity does not lead to the oppression of women. It leads to the protection and provisioning of women. If modern women do not desire our protection and provision, they need not accept it, but they cannot tell us that we are not allowed to offer our protection and provisioning. They do not have the power or authority to redesign us and force us to be what they want us to be and do what they want us to do. A man who is truly masculine doesn't need the permission or approval of others to be what he is. Another component of masculinity that is resented by feminists is the tendency for masculine men to possess strong natural leadership qualities. In the same way that the physically strongest people are all men, the strongest natural leaders are also men. The feminists believe that the reason why most leaders throughout human history have been men is because of men's unfair treatment of women. They believe that men are chosen as leaders arbitrarily just because they're men. If the strongest people in the world are men, and they can all lift more weight than women, that is not a case of the oppression of women. It's a product of our objective physical reality. If the strongest natural leaders in the world are men, and they can inspire the most people to follow them, that is not a case of the oppression of women. It is also a product of our objective physical reality. There are many masculine traits that are strongly beneficial to leadership, and men are obviously much more likely to be masculine than women are. Leadership is not something that can be granted to somebody arbitrarily. Leadership is not just a role, it's a characteristic that a person either does or does not possess. People can learn leadership skills and improve their ability to lead through experience. However, the greatest leaders tend to be people who possess very strong natural leadership qualities. Masculinity is beneficial in leadership, and men are naturally masculine, so it should not be difficult to understand, nor controversial to say, that men are much more likely than women to be good at leadership. That doesn't mean that all men are going to be better leaders than all women. It just means that the best leaders will be men, just like the physically strongest people will be men. Also, leadership should not be viewed as some kind of prestigious prize to be won. That's a very selfish perception of leadership. The greatest leaders don't desire positions of leadership because they are selfish and power hungry. The greatest leaders take on leadership roles so they can use them to have a positive impact on the world and serve the people they're leading to the benefit of the people they're leading. With great power comes great responsibility. A great leader should be seeking responsibility, not power. If you want to take on responsibility, you must also take on the power that is associated with that responsibility. If I gave you a locked box that could only be opened with a key that I refuse to give you, and I tell you that there is a small animal in that box for which you are now responsible, are you actually responsible for the well-being of that animal? If you do not possess the power to access the animal, to open the box and give it fresh air and water and food, how could you possibly be responsible for the well-being of that animal? You can only be responsible for something or someone if you have the requisite power associated with that responsibility. The desire for responsibility is a hallmark component of masculinity. Most men have a profound intrinsic need to be needed. This tendency has been demonized by the feminists and added to the list of traits and behaviors that they have labeled as toxic masculinity. Feminism is a Marxist ideology at its core, so feminists tend to believe that everything in life should be viewed as a struggle for power. If men desire responsibility, which they cannot have without also taking on the power associated with the responsibility, then all the feminists see is men trying to attain power. They completely ignore a desire for responsibility and do not factor that into their assessments. The consensus among psychologists who study the effects of promiscuous romantic behaviors is that promiscuous romantic behaviors cause severe psychological damage to both men and women. The damage is most severe for women, but promiscuous romantic activities are detrimental to both men and women. Knowing this, if I advise people to refrain from engaging in such activities, am I exhibiting toxic masculinity and trying to control people to satisfy my own personal, selfish desires? Am I offering this advice because I desire power, or am I offering this advice because I possess an intrinsic need to take responsibility and wield the power that is associated with that responsibility in an attempt to benefit people and have a positive impact on the world around me? The feminists do not consider the possibility that my intentions might be benevolent. They automatically assume that my intentions must be nefarious. Unlike the feminists, I do not always automatically assume that people's actions are motivated by ill intent. The feminist war on masculinity is not entirely intentional or nefarious. I believe that many feminists believe they are trying to help people and make the world a better place, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't believe that most feminists are consciously waging war on masculinity. I believe the war on masculinity is mainly fueled by a combination of misconception and negative subconscious bias regarding masculinity. Feminist propaganda has convinced most women and a lot of men that masculinity is intrinsically toxic. That is the misconception. The negative unconscious bias comes from the bitterness and resentment that people experience when they have been hurt by men. Many of the most prominent feminists right from the very beginning of the movement were obviously bitterly resentful of men and masculinity after being mistreated by men in their lives. Hurt people hurt people. The war on masculinity is largely fueled by a strong desire for revenge against men. While I sympathize with those who have been hurt by men, I cannot condone the punishment of all men for the crimes of some few men. Labeling all masculinity as toxic because some men have done bad things is an extreme overreaction. The terrible actions committed by some men is not the result of their masculinity, any more than the terrible actions committed by some women is not the result of their femininity. Demonizing all men and labeling all masculinity as toxic is not constructive, it is destructive. It will not lead to positive results, it will only lead to negative results. If you constantly drill into the minds of all men from the time they're boys that they are intrinsically monstrous, don't be surprised when they start behaving like monsters. If you're told throughout your entire life that you're a monster, you might start to believe it and become a monster. The political left says that we must accept people for who and what they naturally are. They say we cannot pass judgment upon people and we must embrace and celebrate people as they are. Then they claim that all masculinity is toxic and must not be tolerated. They believe that what men naturally are is wrong and men must be forcefully redesigned. They believe that only women should be allowed to be masculine, or that bastardized version of pseudo-masculine, and they believe that men must only be that bastardized version of pseudo-feminine. They have no tolerance for women who are feminine or men who are masculine. A lot of conversations are being had these days about the feminist war on masculinity, but feminism is also waging war on femininity, and less people are talking about that. Feminism is not only misandristic, it is also misogynistic, antinatalist, gerontophobic. Feminism is downright misanthropic. The movement is clearly antagonistic to all people. The core goals of feminism right from the start were to destroy marriage, the nuclear family, and bring down the patriarchy and replace it with egalitarianism. Essentially, feminism has been waging war on everything. Masculinity has been labeled as toxic, men have been labeled as monsters, femininity has been labeled as weakness, women have been reduced to objects to be used for intimate activities. Children and the elderly are viewed by the feminists to be nothing but inconvenient burdens. All rules and roles and responsibilities are viewed as tyrannically oppressive. It's not just men who are suffering the wrath of the feminists, it's everyone and everything. I can no longer be affected by the labeling of masculinity as toxic. I don't care what the feminists think of me. I definitely don't care how they feel about me. Masculinity is not toxic, it's great. Just like femininity is not weakness, it is also great. Both masculinity and femininity should be appreciated, and we should stop denying the existence of the diversity between men and women, and start, once again, taking full advantage of it. People who label masculinity as toxic are themselves toxic. We should not be having conversations about toxic masculinity. We should be having conversations about positive masculinity. I refuse to apologize for being a man. The only thing I have to say about my masculinity and being a man is, I am man. You are welcome.